Hello, this is going to be a series I am going to call Battlefield 4 Hardcore Meta, a guide to the hardcore preset of Battlefield 4. I understand that BF4 is a battlefield that, while fairly old at this point, is still quite worth playing. It's the last battlefield to take place in a modern warfare setting as of the release of this video. And since Battlefield 6 won't be until the end of this year, and I enjoyed making my Battlefield 5 guide series, I figured I'd do the same for BF4. It's a game that needs it even more, as it's a game with a fairly daunting sized armory. I know that BF4's normal mode has already been covered to death by other very respectable creators, and I kind of want to encourage people to give hardcore a try. So I'm going to cover Battlefield 4's meta from a primarily hardcore perspective. Hardcore, for those who do not know, is a mode in BF4 that strips away most of your HUD and sets infantry health to 60%. On top of it not having been covered in depth really, as far as I know, it has also always been my preferred way to play the game. I like BF4 Hardcore because the time to kill speeds up, such that slow killing weapons that are normally worthless in normal mode become reasonable choices in Hardcore. And I'd say there isn't any weapons in Hardcore that you can't justify using in at least a niche sense. Further, Hardcore really punishes bad tactics and rewards smart plays, whereas normal tends to focus more on drawn-out gun battling, with really my only complaints with BF4's Hardcore being that bolt-action rifles become inappropriately effective in close to medium range, and smartly used armored vehicles become nearly impossible to take down as an unsupported engineer. I find such a trade-off worthwhile, however. In this first video, we're going to cover something fairly basic: sidearms. Not only that, but the most conventional of BF4 sidearms: the P226, M9, and MP443. To start, I'll quickly go over the unlock requirements for these guns. The P226 is unlocked by default. The M9 is the second sidearm to be unlocked at 4,000 pistol score, and the MP443 Grach is the fourth sidearm to be unlocked at 13,000 pistol score. Suffice to say, these are all sidearms you'll have access to early. The per shot damage model for all three of these guns is exactly the same. They can down a target with 3 shots to the chest up to 30 meters, or 3 shots up to 26 meters for targets with the defense perk, or with stomach or leg shots. You will always put a target down with no more than 6 shots anywhere to the body at any range the bullet is still flying. If you manage 2 headshots in a row, you can take a target down out to 49 meters. If you manage at least 1 headshot, you can take a target down in 1 additional hit anywhere up to 32 meters. This is mostly just under the middle of the road per shot damage for pistols. Another notable thing that is identical is their deploy time. They all have the same deploy time of 0.6 seconds. This is the fastest time for available sidearms, though a few sidearms outside of this category also match this. Further, it's important to note that their accuracy is overall on the poor side compared to other sidearms. Of 0.5 degrees, this is 25% worse than the CQC primary weapons, the PDW's, starting accuracy. Most of their other stats are similar to each other, but let's go over the differences and then after that, make some suggestions based on their stats and role. The P226 is the jack-of-all-trades option of the 3, and seeing as these pistols are already somewhat jacks-of-all-trades, the P226 is probably the least specialized pistol in the game. It certainly makes sense that it's the starting pistol. It doesn't excel in any particular category, except perhaps in that it is tied for the lowest upwards recoil with only 1 other pistol out of all pistols, and has the fastest deploy time like the other 2 sidearms covered in this video. But its best-in-class upwards recoil is somewhat tainted by its pretty bad side-to-side recoil and spread, limiting its precision. Its rate of fire is technically higher than the median handgun at 400 RPM, but overall still pretty low considering all weapons in the game. With a tactical of 1.25 seconds and an empty of 1.4 seconds, the P226's reload times are middle of the road for semi-auto pistols, which in this case makes them very fast compared to basically every other weapon class. That said, if you empty its magazine, the reload is longer, but you are punished with less overall downtime compared to if you reload too frequently. It's also important to remember this in hardcore, considering you throw away whatever is left in the magazine when you reload early. Speaking of, with 15 plus 1 shots total before empty, if you land a body shot within the 3-shot range, you can kill 5 targets with 1 magazine. This isn't great compared to semi-auto pistols as a whole, but it's a pretty healthy capacity. The M9's most notable trait is its superior bullet velocity compared to the other two, about 8.5% faster than the P226 and about 18.75% faster compared to the MP443 at 380 meters per second. Don't let this get to your head though. It's technically mediocre overall for sidearms, which don't tend to have fast velocities in the first place. Its recoil compared to the P226 is very similar, though it has a slight higher upwards recoil of 0.45, and the side to side is the same proportionally, but it's not lopsided to the left like the P226, making it typically more straightforward to control. Its reload is similar to most semi-autos like the P226, but it's a little more punitive for empty reloads, so you might consider trying to mentally track how many shots you've taken. It has exactly the same capacity as the P226. Speaking of reload speed and capacity, that's really the MP443's strongest traits among these 3 pistols. In fact, its overall ammo reliability is second only to the FN57 among all sidearms with these 2 strong stats combined. With 17 plus 1 total rounds to shoot before empty, and best-in-class reload times of 1.2 seconds tactical and 1.28 seconds empty, you can pretty easily get away with firing this weapon until empty. Very useful in hardcore. This ammo reliability comes with some drawbacks compared to the other 2 pistols. It has a 5% slower firing rate, a nasty upwards recoil of 0.7, and a slow bullet velocity of 320 meters a second. These traits make the pistol less useful for aggressive play. A minor plus side is that its overall side-to-side recoil is only 0.2, and it has about a 66% faster recoil decrease speed, making paced, precise, and deliberate shots more intuitive. To start with the barrels, the P226 doesn't really need anything but the standard barrel if you want to use it as a mediocre emergency fallback in close range. However, if you want to specifically use it for the 9mm pistol's niche of being mid-range, 20 to 30 meter emergency fallbacks, you should go for the heavy barrel. But why not other options? Well, you likely want to maintain hipfire accuracy. As a result, the suppressor ends up not being worthwhile as it harms hipfire performance by 20%. Further, the suppressor is proportionally fairly punitive to the P226 in terms of bullet velocity compared to other pistols. The muzzle brake, or compensator, could in theory make sense if you wanted to double down on improving its already low recoil of 0.4, but seeing as this is a middle-of-the-road gun otherwise, the sacrifice to its spread increase is not worth it. As mentioned, the P226's upwards recoil is already very low, and the lowered recoil effect at relevant ranges is so negligible that an increase in accuracy bloom just isn't worth it. A compensator would have a larger statistical effect, but an increase in bloom still isn't worth it, as despite it being fairly bad on the P226, side-to-side recoil isn't a significant detriment to the weapon's performance within its relevant ranges. The heavy barrel technically improves the P226's overall accuracy for longer ranged shots the most because the additional upwards recoil is so minor because the base recoil is so low. The flash hider might also seem like a decent option if you like to fire through smoke or other obscuring material without revealing your location, as its drawback is even less of a notable hindrance than the muzzle brake or compensator. The flash hider lowers the spread decrease speed by 17%, which makes the weapon take longer to resettle back to max accuracy after firing any number of shots. However, this concealment is a niche benefit again for a drawback that edges out its more generalized usage as a sort of emergency every pistol. So I can't really suggest this either. The pistol ends up at least being the most precise of the three with the heavy barrel overall. Just note the velocity is a bit more sluggish than the M9. The P226 is a mid-range pistol best used with a barrel that can best provide the accuracy for it. Luckily, it's pretty fun to use in game, owing to a sort of elegant simplicity. For the M9, I suggest the heavy barrel. My reasoning for this is simple. The M9 has the fastest velocity of these three, and if you want to take a bit more advantage of that, you'll want an overall lower spread. This of course increases recoil a little, and the M9's upward starting recoil is 12.5% worse compared to the P226 to begin with, and it matches the P226's bad side-to-side recoil. But its upwards recoil is still very low compared to most pistols, and the resulting recoil with a heavy barrel is not impactful at the ranges you should use the weapon at. It's going to be a little easier to land more precise shots on moving targets at the farther edge of this range, and the somewhat flatter trajectory from the faster velocity combined with the heavy barrel's halved spread will make landing headshot kills on unaware targets at longer ranges easier. And finally, the MP443. The MP443, I suggest the suppressor. Its starting bullet velocity is already low, and the suppressor's effect on bullet velocity is actually also proportionally less severe than with other pistols. Further, the MP443 has excellent ammo reliability, the best among these pistols, and second only to the FN57 among all pistols. This pairs well with a suppressor, as you'll want more shots if you are on a flank, and to make up for the increased difficulty of landing shots with a lower velocity. Further, the other drawbacks of the MP443, the slightly slower RPM of 380 and the much higher upwards recoil of 0.7 degrees, end up being less of a hindrance when used in a flank, as time to kill is somewhat less important if you get behind enemy lines. Otherwise, the MP443 functions fine as an adequate emergency sidearm, even with the suppressor's negative effect on hipfire. But it won't outshine the other two in this role no matter how you build it. Keep in mind, the MP443 specifically pairs poorly with the heavy barrel due to the sharp upwards recoil it has. When it comes to accessories, a laser sight for the M9 and P226 makes the most sense. In situations where you're pulling these weapons out, stealth is no longer likely to be an option, since most of the time you'll already be in the heat of battle. Plus, the possibility of some last-moment laser dazzling couldn't hurt. The statistical effect is the same regardless of which laser, however the visual differences can have some minor effect on gameplay. Green is actually somewhat easier to spot in most situations, I find, though it, in theory, could perhaps blend in with greenery and might trip up newer players who might mistake it for the default bright green squad-friendly indicator HUD icons. Red pairs well with flares, as you can throw flares and your laser will blend in with them to a certain degree. This might be my imagination, but the tri-beam laser seems to be the rarest laser in battle packs, but does come with the added benefit of actually being closest to the center of your screen, more accurately representing where your shots will land. So if you have the tri-beam, I strongly suggest it for that reason, as hardcore lacks an aiming reticule, though you could also just put a piece of tape on the center of your monitor if you were so inclined. And the tri-beam comes of course with the added benefit of being red, thus blending well with the throwable flares like a standard red laser would. There is, of course, the question of whether flashlights are worthwhile, and for me, these pistols, while generalists, benefit more from improved hipfire more than dazzling effects, so I do not recommend any flashlight variant unless you find yourself frequently dying to weapons with IRNV or FLIR optics. For the MP443, I actually advise against any accessory. The build I advise's main purpose is stealth, and unless you remember to turn off your laser or flashlight every time you redeploy, you will probably inadvertently give away your position once you pull these weapons out. Especially if you use smoke in conjunction with it to achieve flanks, any attachment that produces light can easily give you a severe disadvantage if left on. There is one caveat. If you like the idea of basically pretending to be a lamp in the corner and find yourself using the MP443 like a pistol primary, such a suppressed pistol is probably one of the better options to take advantage of a dazzling flashlight, as I find when you are stationary and your shots are quieter, players tend to have a harder time determining what's hitting them. Just be conscious of turning the light off when on the move. My suggested sight for these pistols is either the Mini or Delta red dot sights. Not only do these sights offer a more open sight picture before firing, they also more accurately represent where your shots are going once you start to pull the trigger. The iron sights and ghost ring sights will actually cover up where your bullets are going once visual recoil affects your shots, making it harder to aim. Switch to a red dot the moment you unlock one, and do not look back. I advise using these three sidearms in conjunction with assault rifles with long reloads, carbines with long reloads, and any small magazine LMGs. Though in the case of assault rifles, being that they're locked to the assault class, make sure you are using these pistols in a medium range map, or at least consider the slug-throwing M26 as a gadget to cover for longer sightlines in longer ranged maps, or one of the buckshot or flechette shotguns the assault can equip if you find yourself in very close ranged areas of a map. As for other primary pairings, if paired with a big magazine LMG, a lot of their strengths, like fast swap and fast reload, become redundant. Shotguns, PDWs, DMRs, and bolt actions tend to be better served with sidearms that can act as alternative primaries that can cover for close or long-range weaknesses. And these pistols don't fulfill that role. Being more specific, the M9 will probably pair better with the generally longer-ranged assault rifles, the P226 with the generally closer ranged carbines, and the MP443 with a suppressor goes well with any flanking loadouts or in maps where flanks are likely to be achieved and you lack a suppressed primary, or in situations where you want both of your primary and fast swap sidearm to be suppressed for consistency. I don't really advise using them for such a purpose, but when you have these weapons out with the intention of using them to cover up for a closer ranged combat weakness of your primary, try to stick to engagement ranges of about 20 to 30 meters, as that tends to be the comparative sweet spot. And consider pre-firing, as they have generally slow times to kill overall, and no, you will still usually lose gunfights. Getting closer, you likely can't compete with higher DPS CQC weaponry at all. And much farther than 30 meters, and overall performance begins to falter fairly significantly, and most precision weapons will easily end you. That said, you probably can get away with a bit farther, as with 2 headshots you can theoretically take a target out up to 49 meters, though this is mostly going to be doable only when the target is unaware of you, and the spread of the pistol doesn't betray you at such a distance. If you use the M9 with the heavy barrel, as stated before, you'll get the best overall trajectory for such a task among these 3 pistols. These pistols are the sidearms you should turn to when you need a sidearm to perform the basic role they tend to provide in most competitive shooters, as a good emergency fast swap pistol for when your primary runs dry and most of your engagements are going to be within 20 to 30 meters. But they can't really perform decently in of themselves when you simply need some solid performance on their own. They are satisfying to get kills with if you can manage, owing to their simplicity, giving them a level of elegance you wouldn't get from other options that might have a clever aspect or special trait. If you want to be informed of future video releases by me, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell for notifications. Also consider liking the video if you enjoyed it. If there is something I missed, or you think I got wrong, or if you just want to contribute to discussion, please feel free to comment as well.